Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. My name is Andrew. I'm a doctorate psychology student at the University of Quebec in Montreal. And when I was an undergraduate student, I spent hours researching and learning how to craft a good email, what made an email good, and how professors responded differently depending on the type of email I sent. And so after years of writing bad emails and learning from my own mistakes, I developed a formula to craft emails that professors respond to, that are simple to read, and that are likely to get you more responses from interested professors. So that's what I'm going to be sharing with you today, is the exact formula that I used to get into graduate school and find professors that I was interested in working with. And stick around until the end, because I'm going to be showing you a side-by-side comparison of the kinds of emails you really should be writing versus the kinds of emails you really should not be writing. So I've spent years now as a doctoral student and as a research coordinator for McGill University, seeing a bunch of emails go through and understanding really what makes an email good and what makes it bad. And the 5 components of a really killer email are the introduction, the purpose, so why are you writing the email, adding some context to the email, which is adding a little bit of extra detail to the purpose of the email, but we'll get back to that in a little bit. Then you might want to add some additional details very briefly. And finally, you want to finish off with a really strong closing message. And so the order in which the components actually appear in the email is really important and will actually determine whether or not your email is likely to get a response, to be readable and enjoyable, and get your point across really simply and really clearly. Because remember that the cardinal rule of sending emails is that they need to be clear, short, and to the point. Professors and everybody else these days get hundreds, if not thousands of emails every week, every month. And I've heard stories of professors getting over hundreds of emails every year from interested graduate students. So if they're having to sift through these really long and complex emails, they're more likely to ignore it, to junk the email, delete it, whatever. And just to drive home my point that the order of these components is actually important and that they are graded based on importance. I mean, you could, I guess, send an email that doesn't have any context or that is lacking additional details, but you'd be hard pressed to send an email without introducing yourself, without stating the purpose. But with that said, let's just get right into the first component and talking about introducing yourself in the email. And so this might sound obvious to most of you, but I'm going to say it anyways. When you send an email, you obviously need to introduce yourself, talk about what university you're writing from, and the program of study you're in. Professors can sometimes get hundreds of emails from different people, and they can get lost and overwhelmed very easily by the sheer number of students writing to them. So if you don't make it clear who you are, where you're writing from right off the get-go, they might not remember you for future conversations, and they're more likely to just junk your email or ignore it and all the bad things that you really don't want. And so going back to the cardinal rule of email writing, which is that things should be short and sweet, your introduction should follow that same rule as well. So you really want to focus on 2 main things. The first is introducing yourself, like I've already said, stating the university at which you're studying and your study program, which can help professors kind of piece you together. And if you want to take it one step further, like I mentioned, you can add a little blurb saying that perhaps you met them at a past conference, or you've taken a class with them and you really enjoyed the subject. And this helps the professor remember who you are, give them a picture of you in their mind's eye and that sort of thing, which really helps kind of push the flow of communication forward. And that really helps kind of build this rapport, even though it might have been a long time since you last communicated with them. They're more likely to remember and be able to place you and be willing to engage in kind of mutual conversation. And now, if you haven't had any interactions with the professor in the past, it's not that big of a deal. Tell them that you read a recent research paper of theirs that really piqued your interest, or saw them talk at this conference or at this video, or anything really that can kind of start creating a connection or show that you engaged with the professor, even if it's not directly. The key is that when you're writing the introduction, you want to be precise and say the exact conference you met them, maybe what you talked about, and all that kind of good stuff, just because you don't want to make it too general where it's like, oh, I've taken a class with you in the past, and the professor's kind of like, okay, which class, what's going on? And so they once again forget you, and you're going to come across much less professional, and they're more likely to forget you and just junk the email. And so that's really it for the introduction. Now remember to just keep it short and sweet. I'd suggest 1, maybe 2 sentence max, but that really drives your point across with precision and clarity. Now that the introduction is done, we can move on to directly stating the purpose of the email. So if you're like me, you probably scan the emails you get very quickly, and imagine getting hundreds, if not thousands of emails every year. You're more likely to scan emails even more quickly, right? So professors scan emails really rapidly, so they need to know exactly why you're emailing them as soon as possible. So right after you're done your introduction, you want to get into the purpose. So why are you writing to them? So again, here, remembering the cardinal rule, you really want to keep it short and to the point. So you should aim for 1 sentence that really drives home the point of why you're emailing them. So now this could be something as simple as, I'm writing to you today because I'd like to meet with you to discuss opportunities for graduate school in your department, or, can you please send me a recommendation letter on this and this and that subject? Now here the purpose is clear, it's delivered in a single sentence, it's easy to read, and it appears really early on in the email, which is perfect because, as I said, professors need to know first who you are, then why you're emailing them. So now so far we've given a good introduction, we've written a purpose, they know why we're emailing them, but it's still a little bit vague. In what context are we emailing them? So we need to provide a little bit more additional information as to why we're requesting this information, or why we're requesting to meet with them to discuss graduate school. And that's where context comes in. So now think of the context as supplemental information to the purpose of the email. It's the information you need to really understand the purpose, the why of the email. Why are you asking them to provide more information? Why are you asking them to meet to discuss graduate school? So let's take the example that you were writing an email to discuss graduate school opportunities with the professor, and the context of the email would be simply because you are thinking of applying to graduate school next fall and you're really interested in their program, so you'd like to discuss the opportunities. So always going back to the cardinal rules of email writing, keep it simple and to the point. So again, one sentence should do the trick just fine. Don't aim for an elaborated amount of context. They don't need that at this point. Just one simple sentence that gets your point across. And so far we've kind of followed this step-by-step formula, I guess, without too much creativity, right? It's very much introduction, purpose, context, done. Now, I like to keep the last sentence of the email to discuss any additional details I might want to communicate with the professor. This could be where they can find some additional information about me, some projects that I want to highlight, discuss really my interest with them a little bit further. Here's where I see a lot of students kind of going overboard as well, where they're going to go on and talk in a really long-winded email about all their different interests, why the professor should really be interested in them, and all this kind of good stuff. But it will make the email really, really long, really text-heavy, and it's going to be very difficult for the professor to sit down and read. If you've ever gotten the feeling of opening an email and it's just this really big, long block of text with many paragraphs, and it feels like you have to sit down and read a few chapters of a book, it's not a good feeling to have. And it's even worse if you're getting hundreds of emails like these every year or every few months. So when you're adding additional details to the email, remember the cardinal rule again. Simple, short, and to the point. So maybe 1 or 2 sentences again. And this should really be a way of redirecting the professor to where they can find additional information. This could be something like directing them to the attachments of the email, like your CV, maybe a letter of intent, and that you've attached for them to look over. And remember that when you're adding the additional details, I really suggest that you show a strong bias towards action. And that means that you really want to show the professor that you're motivated and you're taking the steps to actually develop skills and practices that are really going to help you in graduate school or in your field of study. And so if you can, redirect them maybe to some projects you've made, to letters of recommendations from others that can speak on your behalf of involvement in the community, of involvement in research or in your interest, and really show the professor that you've taken the time to develop skills, to develop projects or what have you, really in the field that interests you, because it will show a strong bias towards action and not just saying what you've done, but showing what you've done. Get it? And so for reviewing what we have so far, our email might look something like this. So we have a good introduction. We state a clear purpose to the email that is concise, clear, and to the point. We provide a little bit of context, not too much, just enough so that they understand the context of our email. And we give a 1 or 2 line maximum of additional information that redirects the professor to where they can find additional information about us that will show a strong bias to action for the field that we're most interested in. And so now that we have all these different components kind of all put together inside of the email, what's left is to close the email. And the closing message really doesn't matter as much as it might seem. So just do anything that seems courteous, simple, and natural to you. So that's the way you would generally speak to them if you were to meet them in person. But you can end with sincerely, with thank you, with very much looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you, respected Dr. So-and-so. Really anything that floats your boat is going to be just fine, as long as it follows, again, the cardinal rule of keeping it simple, short, and to the point. And so there you have it. That's the exact formula and the 5 components that I use to craft just about every email I send now as a doctoral student and as a research coordinator. And if you use this formula yourself with the 5 components and you remember the cardinal rule of email writing of keeping it short, simple, and to the point, then there's no reason you shouldn't be blasting out emails and sending emails very quickly that are more likely to gather responses and more likely to get you into graduate school or whatever your objective may be. So now that we've talked about the formula, the components, and how to write a beautifully crafted email and do so very quickly, very succinctly, I want to talk about one of the biggest mistakes I see students make, and that's that they adopt this kind of general formula, right? Generally, everyone has this idea of how you should write an email and the different elements that should go into it, but they play around with the order, and I'm going to show you exactly why that's important. So now students generally understand that the introduction should be the first component of the email, but because they want to write enough about themselves, enough about their interests, so that the professor will understand why they should be interested in that student, why they should care about the email, and so on, that are actually going to move the purpose, the context, and the additional information around. And what ends up happening is that you get an email that's structured so that you have the introduction, you have a little bit of the purpose, maybe a little bit of the context, and then a lot of additional information that comes into the email, and then the student finishes off again with the purpose of the email and the context. And so here on the screen, I'm showing you an email that is poorly structured, where the student actually played around with the formula and modified some of the elements. So again, they're starting off with the introduction. Then there's a really big chunk of additional information. So where the student most likely wants to show their interest, discuss why they would be a good fit with the graduate program, why the professor should care, and etc. And then they're closing off with the purpose and the context. And writing an email like this is bad for two reasons. The first being that the professor either skims through the email to get to the purpose and to the context, which is at the end. And so you've wasted your entire time writing this really beautiful paragraph of additional information the professor either didn't read or didn't care about, just because they want to skip to the context. Or the professor takes their time to read through the entire email that has all this additional context, and they feel like they've wasted maybe a little bit of their time just to get to the context and the purpose. So the professor's already starting off with a little bit of a disagreement with you, if you will. So now if you compare it to this email that's properly structured according to the formula that we presented earlier, with the introduction, purpose, the context, the additional details, and the closing message all appearing in the right order in a way that it's short, clear, and precise, you'll see that it's a much stronger email, gets your point across just as beautifully, and it does so with fewer sentences that are more clear, more precise, and in a way that professors are going to be able to respond to more quickly. And you're not even losing any information from this email, because the information that you put in the previous email that was really long-winded, you can put that in a letter of intent, in a CV, show a project, have a strong bias to action, and redirect to that information in an attachment when you're writing that additional detail section. That being said, I do want to make it a point that you're free to write emails the way that's on the most natural to you. This has just been what worked for me and what helped me get the most responses, and what helps me not break my head every time I need to write email or craft an email, right? So you have this kind of template you can follow step by step, and it just helps you crack out email after email in a way that seems natural, that shows your interest, and that professors are more willing to respond to. Anyways, that's all I had for you today. I hope you found this video useful, and I also created an absolutely free email template that follows these 5 components, the framework that we went over in this video, that you can use and download for yourself. So the link is down in the description below. And as always, I'd love to hear what you think, so comment down below and share some email tips or some mistakes that you've made in the past. And if you like this video, consider liking and subscribing. It would really help me out and encourage me to keep making this kind of content for you guys. And if you're interested in checking out some of my other videos on tips on getting into graduate school and living student life, you can check them out here or here. But yeah, that's it for me, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Cheers.